George Russell is one of the most interesting drivers in the recent history of Formula 1. If we went back just a couple of years, George Russell was arguably one of the most loved drivers in the sport, and seen as one of the most likely contenders to be a future world champion. But fast forward to 2026, and George Russell is arguably one of the most disliked drivers on the grid, and it doesn't look like Russell really has a shot at the World Championship anymore. Which begs the question, where did it all go wrong for George Russell? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about in today's video. So, let's start way back to his debut season in 2019. Back in 2019, George Russell started his Formula 1 career racing for Williams. At this point in time, Williams was a complete mess of a team. The team had fallen massively from the success in the 80s and the 90s, and they were a shell of what they once were. And 2019 was a terrible season for them. It started off with them missing the first 2 days of pre-season testing, because the car was not ready, and when it did get ready, it was bad. Like, horrifically bad. But no matter, they had a young upstart in George Russell, who was a part of the Mercedes Driver Academy, and they had returning Formula 1 driver Robert Kubica. But Robert Kubica, much like Williams, was a shell of his former self when it came to Formula 1. See, Robert Kubica was a world champion level driver before his rally accident in 2011. The rally accident severely damaged his arm, making driving Formula 1 cars in a very tight cockpit almost impossible. But he did manage to return, but the pace of Robert Kubica was just not there. On average in 2019, Russell outpaced Robert Kubica by an average of 0.6 seconds in the Grand Prix. Even if Kubica was not the Kubica of old, it is still very strong. The signs were clear then that George Russell was destined for great things, and he was not destined to be in a backmarker team for long. Moving on to the 2020 season, and it was more of the same from George Russell, except this time his teammate was a Canadian driver named Nicholas Latifi. Russell beat Nicholas Latifi 16-0 in qualifying, and in the Grand Prix it was 8-2 in the favour of George Russell. This is counting when of course both drivers finished the Grand Prix. Clearly, Russell was ahead of Latifi in 2020, and we also got a glimpse of the future. At the Sakhir Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton had to drop out of the weekend due to him catching this virus called COVID. Not really sure if you've ever heard of that virus before, but it was there, and Lewis Hamilton had to back out from the weekend. However, this meant that Mercedes development driver George Russell got the opportunity to step up to the big team and show the world what he was made of. He would be teaming up alongside Mercedes number 2 driver Valtteri Bottas. All he had to do this weekend was be close to Bottas, because surely Russell wouldn't beat Bottas. Bottas is a multiple-time race winner in the Mercedes. He has been in the car since 2017. He has at times outpaced Lewis Hamilton, literally the most successful driver in F1 history, and Bottas knew the car like the back of his hand. Well, in qualifying, Bottas did get pole position, but Russell was right there. In fact, Bottas set a time of a 53.377 seconds, and Russell got a time of a 53.403 seconds. He was within half a tenth of a second. But surely in the Grand Prix, Bottas would have the edge, right? Nope, Russell nailed the start and immediately took the lead off of Valtteri Bottas at the start of the Grand Prix. In fact, Russell ended up leading the first 45 laps of the Grand Prix. He only lost the lead due to stopping for fresh tyres. But he regained that lead, and it looked like Russell was going to win his debut race at Mercedes. But then, it all went wrong. Jack Aitken in the second Williams car managed to crash out of the Grand Prix, bringing out the safety car. And both Mercedes cars stopped, but then Mercedes put some of Bottas's tyres on Russell's car, forcing Russell to make yet another pit stop. Even so, at the restart, Russell mugged Bottas and left him for dead. Then he got a puncture, and you could almost say that there was a conspiracy theory there by Mercedes because they really didn't want George Russell to beat Valtteri Bottas and maybe even win the Grand Prix on his very first race for Mercedes. But even so, there was no doubt that Russell showed the world that he was ready for a move up to a top team. Surely this gave Mercedes all the convincing that they would need that Russell was the man for the 2021 season to be alongside Lewis Hamilton, right? No, that didn't happen. Instead, in 2021, Mercedes stuck with Valtteri Bottas and Russell would have to spend yet another season at Williams. In 2021, though, it was still a very big year for George Russell in the Williams. At the British Grand Prix, Russell got into Q3, and literally all of Silverstone erupted with cheers and applause for him. I know this because I was there in the grandstand when it happened. Then at the Belgian Grand Prix, we almost saw something insane. Russell in the Williams almost took pole position in the pouring rain at a wet qualifying at Spa. At this point, it was undeniable that George Russell was ready to move up to a top team. The fans loved Russell. Russell was flying high, and he did technically get a podium in Williams at Spa-Francorchamps. Whether or not you want to count it as a legitimate podium is another debate, but the records show that George Russell scored a podium for Williams in 2021. And this time, he was rewarded with a promotion as George Russell was announced as the 2022 Mercedes driver alongside Lewis Hamilton, the most successful driver of all time. Finally, Russell would have a shot at the World Championship. Unfortunately for George Russell though, heading into 2022, there was a massive regulation change and Mercedes got the concept completely wrong. They could not get their head around the ground effect concept of Formula 1, but even so, Russell was now alongside Lewis Hamilton. If Russell could match and beat Hamilton, then he would definitely be a future world champion, right? Well, during this era, both Hamilton and Russell shared their time as top driver. In fact, Russell was starting to really show that yes, he could be a world champion, and his star power during this time continued to grow. In 2022, Hamilton did outqualify George Russell 13-9, but in the Grand Prix where it matters the most, Russell outraced Lewis Hamilton 11-9, and George Russell was the only Mercedes driver to win a Grand Prix that season by winning at Interlagos and winning at one of Lewis Hamilton's strongest tracks on the calendar. Russell showed everyone that he had arrived. In 2023 though, Lewis Hamilton bounced back against George Russell. They drew in qualifying head-to-heads 11 apiece, but in the Grand Prix it was domination by Lewis Hamilton as he outperformed George Russell 12-5 in the race head-to-heads. But neither driver actually stepped onto the top step of the podium that season, as Lewis Hamilton scored 3 second-place podiums and George Russell only got 2 third places. But even so, this was a learning year for Russell, and his popularity in the sport continued to still grow. Heading into 2024, it was announced at the beginning of the season that Lewis Hamilton would be leaving Mercedes to join Ferrari, and this was the year where Russell really stepped up and became the Mercedes #1 driver. In this season, we started to really see the best from George Russell, and we started to see why he could be a future world champion. However, we also started to see some cracks show from George Russell, and we started to see why some fans would in time turn on George Russell. More specifically, at the end of the 2024 season, when George Russell in an interview for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix talked about how Max Verstappen would lash out and show borderline anger when things didn't go his way. In response, Verstappen called Russell two-faced, which would in time begin to haunt George Russell. In fact, you could say this is where it really did start to go wrong for George Russell. Even so, overall in 2024, it was a great year for Russell. He dominated teammate Lewis Hamilton. In qualifying, he beat him 19-5, and in race trim, Russell beat Hamilton 13-7. Both Russell and Hamilton overall won 2 Grand Prix that season, but it was clear Russell beat Lewis. In 2025, Russell was very much the team leader now, as his teammate was the very young and inexperienced Kimi Antonelli. This season was Russell's first season as the true number 1 driver at Mercedes, and he delivered, outperforming Antonelli very consistently. But for George Russell, there must have been some frustration seeing Kimi Antonelli in the Mercedes in his debut season. Both Antonelli and Russell were Mercedes young drivers, and both drivers were rated very highly by Toto Wolff. However, Russell had to spend 3 seasons in the Williams, while Mercedes were dominating Formula 1. However, Kimi Antonelli was sprung immediately into a Mercedes seat, skipping out on a driver Williams. Antonelli was given what many people back in 2020 thought George Russell should have had, which was an opportunity to drive for the Mercedes team instead of spending a season at a lower down team. Then we head to 2026, and heading into the season, it was looking like Mercedes were going to be the team to absolutely dominate the season, meaning that it was likely George Russell or Kimi Antonelli would be the world champion. And George Russell started the season by winning the Australian Grand Prix, and it looked like initially that this would be an easy championship win for George Russell. But then in Shanghai, Kimi Antonelli broke his duct and he won his first Grand Prix. And ever since Kimi Antonelli won that Chinese Grand Prix, things just haven't been the same for George Russell and Mercedes. Because since that moment, it has felt like a change at the Mercedes team. It used to be the Russell team, and he was the clear number 1 driver, but it now feels like Kimi Antonelli has taken the reins of the Mercedes number 1. Even when George Russell won in Austria, there was a feeling that Kimi Antonelli actually had the better pace. The same thing could be said with Barcelona as well. Russell has really struggled during the races and has started to come off as a driver who complains and comes off as a bit of a bad loser. The team also starts to feel like they actually prefer Kimi Antonelli to George Russell. And the fans are gravitating towards Antonelli as well, leaving Russell behind. George Russell, honestly, at times is unlikable as a driver. And remember that two-faced comment that Max Verstappen made about George Russell back in 2024? Well, it honestly feels accurate. Russell is the most media-trained driver on the grid, and that works against him at times, I think. I honestly feel like it makes him unlikable, because I don't think we ever get to see the true George Russell. We only see glimpses when he gets frustrated. Russell needs to get back on top of his teammate Antonelli, because it feels like Mercedes as a team are gravitating around Kimi and leaving Russell behind. This is George Russell's best opportunity at a world championship, and while yes, we still are in those early portions of the season, he is squandering this opportunity, and it feels like in the process, he is losing fan support, and most importantly for George Russell, he is losing the support from Mercedes, because the team, it feels like, are gravitating around Kimi Antonelli and not around George Russell. For me, I do think it started to go wrong when we saw the interview with Russell saying Verstappen lashes out when it doesn't go his way, especially because there are multiple instances where Russell has shown his aggressive side. Remember his anger towards Bottas at Imola in 2021, and also his aggressive nature when racing Antonelli at Montreal. Honestly, I don't think his actions in Montreal was actually that bad, but it does show that he too likes to get aggressive and he likes to get his elbows out when he's racing other drivers, and he too can be very aggressive out on track. But it does then show that yes, Russell can be seen as being two-faced. So, do you think it's going wrong for George Russell? If you do, let me know below, and please remember to like the video as it really helps me out. Thank you all so much for watching.